Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you then please leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And welcome to list season for 2026. Happy New Year! This video is a little bit later than I was intending it to be, but hey, better late than never, and the list season videos were the only things I was planning on doing in January anyway, so at least they got out in January. Now, as far as the top 10 TV shows list that I did talk about I was going to do in December, I mentioned that was going to be part of my list season for January. That video will probably not be around until a little bit in February. It's just going to take me a minute to make that video, but I really do want to talk about my top 10 TV shows of 2026 as well, because there was a lot of good TV I watched this year. But January is still going to be focused on movies, and today we're starting, of course, with the bad. Now, unlike with music, I do like to look for and watch as many movies as I can, so sometimes that inevitably means I'll come across some bad movies. And even among the bad movies this year, there were some that were genuinely disappointing to me because they were ones that I was looking forward to for one reason or another, but they still ended up being bad. And there was one movie on here that I'm going to be talking about that I pretty much knew was going to be bad, but I checked it out because I was curious just how bad it was going to be. Maybe you can guess what that is, but I did still want to talk about these movies, and like with music, I do think that it's important to discuss bad art and what makes bad art bad for you in order to appreciate the good arts. And keep in mind that this is just my opinion, so if you disagree with any of the placements on my list or any movies that I talk about here, that's totally fine. Your opinion may differ from mine. But yeah, these are what I thought were the top 10 worst movies of 2026. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get started with number 10. So at number 10, first of, unfortunately, a couple of horror movies. Horror had some really great stuff this year, but it also had some pretty low lows, and we're starting off with Borderline. This one was a bit disappointing to me for a variety of reasons. First of all, the director, Jimmy Warden, I actually didn't mind his other movie that he's made, Cocaine Bear. It is a very silly movie, undeniably, but it knows what it is, and it plays into that he is in love with this girl, this famous pop star played by Samara Weaving, but it turns out that he's just very deluded about it, and one thing leads to another, and he eventually traps her and reveals his true intentions. But while that premise is interesting and it could be potentially a messed up rom-com in the horror genre, unfortunately, it doesn't really pan out that way. And ultimately, the movie actually makes you feel sort of bad for Ray Nicholson's character in many places. And I think that is unintentional in some ways. I think it villainizes mental health, unfortunately, a bit too much. And I don't love the horror trope of using mental health issues as a way to make someone appear scary. And it feels like this movie doesn't really understand the mental issues that Ray Nicholson's character is going through, and it ultimately plays them more for parody and more for laughs more often than anything. I don't love the horror trope of using mental health issues as a way to make someone appear scary, and it feels like this movie doesn't really understand the mental issues that Ray Nicholson's character is going through, and it ultimately plays them more for parody and more for laughs more often than anything else, which makes it feel sort of insulting in my opinion. And while Ray Nicholson is doing his best in this character, I just didn't find myself caring for them that much. I didn't find them to be that interesting. Same goes for Samara Weaving, sadly, playing this pop star character. I didn't find her interesting in this movie. There were some parts where she could play the badass well, but it also felt like a bit unbelievable that her character would have these traits based on how she's built up in the first parts of the movie. And also, it's a bit hard to root for her because she's not necessarily the most likable character in the world. I didn't really care for her that much, and I think the movie was wanting you to root for her. Eric Dane might be the most likable character in the movie as Samara Weaving's bodyguard, but he's not even in the movie that much. I feel like the movie is also very disjointed. It tries to be comedy, it tries to be horror, and I don't think it really does well with either type of vibe that it goes for. I didn't care for the comedy. I didn't find it to be particularly funny when it was trying to be. There's parts where Ray Nicholson is breaking the fourth wall, talking to the audience, that it just felt a little bit awkward at the end of the day. And when the movie is trying to be horror, I didn't think the horror elements really meshed together all that well. I didn't find the movie to be particularly tense at any point. And yeah, I just found this one to be thoroughly disappointing. I was looking forward to it because the trailers looked intriguing, but it ultimately came across as just sort of a very all over the place movie that didn't leave much of an impact on me at all at the end of the day. Next up at number 9 is another horror movie, and this one was also a bit disappointing for me because I had liked what this director had done with his previous movie entry into this sort of classic Universal Creatures universe, and that is Wolfman. This was directed by Leigh Whannell, who famously works with James Wan. The two of them commonly work together, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe James Wan was involved as a producer on this movie. But this is another directorial effort from Leigh Whannell. Before, he had tackled The Invisible Man, and I really liked that one. I thought that was a really well done piece of horror. But in this one, we get a decidedly more generic horror movie about a man who gets bitten by a wolf and turns into a werewolf, and how his family has to cope with that. And there's really not much else beyond that premise. We get to see maybe a couple interesting bits and pieces about how Christopher Abbott's character Blake is slowly transforming into this wolf character, but we don't really see that much of it, and the stuff that they do with him is not that interesting. The design of the wolf also isn't that interesting. This movie decides to emphasize more on making him look more human-like than wolf-like, and I feel like that was a bit of a mistake. Also, a big problem was that we didn't really get to know Blake that well, Christopher Abbott's character, before he turned into the wolf. He's just sort of a generic everyman. I didn't really find much to attach onto with him. So when he turned into the wolf, you didn't really feel this sense of dread or this sense of hope that his family would be able to save him. Julia Garner is fine as Charlotte, but she had a decidedly better performance later on this year in a movie that I'll be talking about in my best movies of the year, and you can probably guess what that is, and it was another horror movie as well. But the script doesn't afford her much to do. At the end of the day, there's really not much to say about this movie. The scares are pretty generic. It has a lot of typical Blumhouse flair all over it, with this idea of there being a jump scare built up to, but then it's a fake out, of course, but then there'll eventually be a real one that's just supposed to make you jump more than anything else. And it just feels like a very middle-of-the-road horror movie. Now, this movie probably did well enough money-wise because Leigh Whannell and James Wan both know how to make movies on a small budget. It probably made its money back. But as a movie itself, I just didn't really feel much of anything from it. I hope whatever movie we get next from the Universal Monster World is a bit better than this one, because this one was a bit of a letdown. I didn't really get much out of it at all.
Waiting on a wish, holding out for someday, hoping somehow, someway.
Next up at number 8 is another in Disney's long roster of miserable remakes, and that is Snow White. Now, I will say that I did not see the other Disney remake this year, Lilo and Stitch, although I did hear some rather bad things about that, and I am planning on checking it out, and maybe I'll think that one deserved a place in the top 10 after I see it, but I never saw that one, so I don't have a particular opinion one way or another. When I first got out of this movie, I was actually feeling a bit more generous to it than other people were, and I actually thought it was okay. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, yeah, this is definitely bad. This is definitely a bad remake. Now, is it on the level of, say, Mulan or Beauty and the Beast or Lion King? No, I don't think it's quite as bad as those, but it is still pretty bad in its own right and has many disastrous decisions it makes. Now, I'm going to go right out of the gate and say that actually the least of this movie's problems is Rachel Zegler. I know a lot of people were upset with her for playing Snow White because she's a woman of color and everything like that. And it was just the most annoying type of people you know complaining about this. I just didn't care about that. I had faith that she could play Snow White well because she is a good actress and she is a talented singer, and she is easily what accounts for pretty much all of this movie's 2 out of 5 stars I gave it. Although I will say the way they designed her hair for Snow White was really bad looking. It just looks really just sort of ugly and not a good hairstyle for her. I saw some pictures of some other hairstyles that they had in mind for her and some other ideas that people had, and those hairstyles that were not ultimately used would have been far better than the one they actually gave her, as well as her costume, which looks like a Halloween costume rather than something that was actually lived in the world of Snow White. And that is one of the most primary obvious problems of this movie, speaking of which, is that this movie feels fake. It doesn't feel like tangible or real what is happening in the movie at any point. The other characters all look like they're wearing Halloween costumes like Snow White, and the visuals of the world just look very plastic. Then there's the uncanny valley CGI in this movie, which might be the biggest flaw in some ways, especially the uncanny, almost borderline frightening CGI of the dwarves. Good lord, what were the directors thinking with this CGI design? This is genuinely awful. As much as I don't like the photorealistic design of the lions in The Lion King, I can at least say that those looked a little bit better than whatever they were doing with the dwarves. My goodness. And they played too big of a role in this movie. This movie makes, in particular perplexingly so, Dopey have a very big role in this movie by the movie's end. And I just do not care what they do with him in the movie. Why did they feel the need to make him talk? And then there's, of course, Gal Gadot as the evil queen. I can't believe there was a time where I was being generous to Gal Gadot as an actor with the original Wonder Woman, where I thought she was generally good, but then I realized in Wonder Woman 1984 that she was actually not that good at all, and she couldn't play the character well. And yeah, now I can just confidently say she's not a good actress. She can't emote, she is very wooden, and she plays the evil queen in, like I was just saying with the dwarves, a very perplexing way. She plays the queen very over the top, whereas in the original Snow White, I think it actually worked for the queen to be more regal and more subtle, but then she plays her disguised form as much more subtle and withdrawn, whereas the witch version of her should be much more imposing and over the top. The only other main acting highlight I can give in the movie is maybe Andrew Burnett as Jonathan the Prince. I didn't mind the character arc they gave him, although it was a bit of a generic one, as someone who was a bit of a ruffian, but eventually softens when he meets Snow White. But he was fine in the movie. The music in this film, it's not as ear-grating as it could have been, but it is having the crime of being very forgettable, and especially the songs with the Evil Queen I just didn't care for at all. The songs with the dwarves didn't leave much of an impression, and like every other Disney remake, pretty much, this one goes way too long. It adds in too much, and it goes on for way longer than it ultimately needs to. So these Disney remakes aren't going anywhere as much as I would like them to. We're going to be getting them for quite some time. It looks like they're maybe eyeing to do Hunchback of Notre Dame soon, and I am filled with dread to see how they're going to butcher that one. But these movies do well, so they'll keep making them, but I'm going to keep criticizing them as they make them, because these movies deserve to be pointed out at as an example of just hollow nostalgia cash grabs with not much else to say about them.
I know you expected me to die. I rose up from the ashes. Now I'm back.
Next up at number 7 is Mountainhead, made by Succession creator Jesse Armstrong. I mean, this movie sounded like it had some potential. A group of rich tech moguls were coming together on a retreat to camp out together, but things happen to where they are constantly double-crossing one another, and it eventually ends in an all-out, almost bloodbath. But yeah, even though that plot sounds cool, the movie that we get is decidedly not that. In fact, this movie is the ultimate just saying rich people bad and nothing else. Now, I don't mind movies that give commentary about the corruption of the wealthy. It is something that is more relevant than ever. But this movie, I don't know if we really need a movie to say that and not add any other type of interesting commentary to the fold. the reason why Succession worked so well as a show is because it wasn't just about the rich people being bad. They also gave interesting character arcs to everyone in the movie. We got some interesting characters to follow along with. We got to see their vulnerabilities, what they went through, and why it wasn't just the money that made them evil. This movie has none of that. It just says, yeah, the rich people in this are bad, and even the one that pretends to be a bit more charitable and more giving is ultimately bad as well. It just is, it's ultimately a nothing burger, and the characters, I just didn't find any of them to be particularly interesting, and pretty much all of them sort of feel like hollow imitations of characters from Succession, like much lesser versions of them. Steve Carell's character Randall feels like a very hollow version of Logan Roy, to the point of the movie also being about him going through a disease where he knows he's going to die eventually and wants to make sure he has a legacy before he passes. This is very similar to Logan Roy. Corey Michael Smith's character Venus is very similar to Kendall Roy, and how he has sort of a father-son bond with Randall's character, even though they're not directly related. It feels like their competition is the same as Logan and Kendall Roy's relationship in Succession. So this movie almost ultimately, I mean, I'm sorry to say, it feels like a very bad, rejected episode of Succession that would have never seen the light of day in that show. And while the plot could be interesting with the characters double-crossing one another, it eventually reaches a point that is so absurd that you have a hard time believing what is actually happening. It feels like a character in this should have died, so it's sort of amazing that no character faces a consequence, and I guess that's sort of part of the movie's commentary, but it's also eye-roll worthy because I don't think it's earned in the plot. I think at least one character should have died in the movie, but none of them do and just sort of move on about their day as if nothing happened. It's just not an interesting watch at all. It just doesn't leave you feeling satisfied in any way, and it leaves you feeling like you knew nothing about the characters you were watching. And yeah, I just ultimately found myself very underwhelmed by this and just found myself wanting to go back and watch Succession rather than seeing this really pale imitation of it. Next up at number 6 is I don't even know if I can say horror anymore for this, because this does not have horror except in maybe the loosest terms possible, and that is Megan 2.0. Now, I actually don't mind the original Megan. It's not like a revolutionary watch or anything, and I don't know if its virality when it came out was as earned as it could have been, but I didn't mind it. Megan 2.0 is wanting to make the move of essentially what Terminator 2 did, is what I'm going to compare it to, or Aliens, where the first movie is a horror movie and then the second one takes a bit of a different genre shift and goes more into action. That is sort of what Terminator 2 and Aliens did, and there's a lot of movies in the horror genre where their sequels do that, where their sequels go away a little bit from the horror route and go a different genre. But the difference with those movies is that they had some degree of quality and effort put into them. This one has very little of that at all put into it. First of all, I just don't think that Megan works as an action hero. She is still a robot in this movie, but they're trying to convince you that our main character can give her some personality. Gemma, played by Michelle Williams, can give her a personality that will make her more of a hero. But at the same time, it seems like Megan's own motivations have changed in the movie. It insults your intelligence further by making you have to accept that Gemma also accepts very quickly that Megan should be remade, should be rebuilt. Whereas Gemma has very good reasons for why she would not want to bring Megan back, and they're totally valid. But the movie has to do all these silly little ideas to convince you about why Megan should be rebuilt. And it ultimately feels too quick. Katie is just the most cliched, rebellious kid you'll see. She does everything you'd expect a rebellious teenager to do. She just gets mad at her mom. She goes out of her way to go against her wishes. And there's really not much to her character other than that. And when she has her heroic moment in the end, it doesn't feel particularly earned. Megan is probably the worst aspect of this movie, I'm sad to say, whereas she could have a little bit of campy fun in the first one. In this one, it's just too much. It's just ridiculous. I didn't buy it for any second. I didn't buy her heroic turn. There's a part of the movie where it's making you doubt whether Megan is good or not, and I almost would have rather the movie ultimately revealed that Megan was still going against the characters in the movie, but that ultimately would have gone against this movie's point, and it would have made at least the movie have some interesting commentary in it. There's this assassin character that's also a robot in the movie, but it actually turns out that the assassin robot isn't technically the bad guy in this movie. And this brings me to where I have to mention that Jason Blum of Blumhouse apparently is very pro AI. He is fine with using AI in movies and fine with AI-generated content being a part of the movie process. The bad guy in this movie is ultimately an anti-AI person, and he's wanting to apparently prove that AI is bad by making a killer AI robot. But his motivation is very all over the place in terms of how he is going for this and trying to prove that AI is bad while still using AI to do it? I don't know. It's so weird. It feels like there could have been another way for him to pursue his motivation rather than using AI to make the ends meet. And yeah, he's a very cartoonish character, just feels like a very unrealistic villain. And ultimately, it's playing into the movie's message that, hey, AI is a good thing. We should accept it. This movie is a disaster in pretty much every aspect, from its pro-AI messaging to the messy character arc they give for Gemma to Megan just being a entirely boring character that feels entirely disconnected from the first one. I wouldn't recommend this at all. At number 5 in my list is The Woman in the Yard. Another horror movie that is ultimately just a really big letdown. How many horror movies are we going to have that try to be the Babadook but not nearly as good as they explore grief? I think this one might be the most egregious example yet, as the way the main character's husband died is in a car crash, and we see a surreal interpretation of said event in the movie. I wonder where we've seen that before. Yeah, that event exactly happens in the Babadook as well. It's almost sort of feels like plagiarism. The main character, also like the main one in the Babadook, has a tense relationship with her kids and seems to be losing her grip on reality throughout the film. The titular woman in the yard appears to be a manifestation of her grief. Now, I will give the movie credit that she actually ends up representing her suicidal tendencies by the end rather than grief. But still, all the parallels that can be drawn to a far better movie in this were something that I couldn't ignore, and it irritated me throughout the film's runtime. Now, Danielle Deadwyler is really giving it her all in the lead role, which is where my 2 stars that I gave this movie ended up coming from, along with there was some cool camera work and there was a promising setup as well. And she and the 2 kids do a good job, and even though it is cliched, I didn't mind the familial drama. The beginning parts of the film with the introduction of the woman are actually pretty chilling, and when she says today is the day, it could be pretty creepy. But the rest of the movie, I think, really falters in the scares. In certain parts, things just linger and the tension entirely dissipates. And what really turned me off to this movie almost entirely was its last-minute twist. And I think that last-minute twist kills it because it leaves the movie's themes muddled. I think we're supposed to interpret at the end of the movie, and this is sort of a messed up interpretation, that Ramona takes her own life and is trapped in a parallel dimension that the woman in the yard creates for her, where everything is as perfect as it can be. And it feels like the movie interprets this as a happy ending. There's an entirely unclear idea going on here, which makes it more frustrating rather than thought-provoking, I think. Especially because the rest of the film is really messy. As I was saying, the scares aren't very good. A lot of things are just shrouded in darkness and you aren't given time to register them. The woman ultimately isn't that intimidating, besides her initial introduction, and the acting doesn't do enough to make the rest of the movie worth watching. These symbolic horror movies, because they're using the same template over and over, maybe we'll get one better in the future, but if this is the quality we're gonna get, you can count me out. Next up is the movie Flight Risk, and yeah, I'll admit, I only saw this one because I knew it was going to be bad and I just wanted to see how bad it was. But ultimately, I regret seeing it because more than anything else, it was just really boring. I didn't get much of anything. Next up is the movie Flight Risk, and yeah, I'll admit, I only saw this one because I knew it was going to be bad and I just wanted to see how bad it was. But ultimately, I regret seeing it because more than anything else, it was just really boring. I didn't get much of anything out of this movie. The only thing that I maybe enjoyed was Michelle Dockery's solid enough performance as Madeline, but even she is not really given much to do and plays sort of a generic action hero. The most of the movie takes place on this plane. It's a very boring set piece and they don't do much with it. There's not much action happening, mainly a lot of boring conversations that ultimately go nowhere. Mark Wahlberg is too cartoonish as the villain Daryl. I just didn't find him remotely intimidating, even though the movie desperately wants you to view him as such. Everything about this movie just feels incredibly silly, and the ending of it almost made me laugh with how bad the CGI was, but it still wasn't enough at the end of the day to even make the movie ironically enjoyable. This is just sort of a dumb, dull-as-dirt watch that you would see on a TV station just to watch mindlessly in the background. Yeah, I don't have much else to say about this. This movie pretty much explains itself for why it's bad. Oh, the top three on this list are pretty rough, I've got to say, and we're starting off with The Electric State, made by the Russo brothers, of course known for making a lot of Marvel movies. And yeah, this one doesn't work for so many reasons. While the robots in this movie do look pretty cool and lifelike, and some of the action scenes are okay, the majority of this movie is a big bunch of nothing. I've read that the book is way better, and that isn't too hard to believe considering what is put onto screen here. The confused messaging about technology is irritating, and it becomes more ironic considering that there is apparently some AI-generated artwork in this film. What we have here is a big movie with a cartoonishly ridiculous budget, and with this budget, it does very little outside of making one of the most generic dystopian narratives I have ever seen. First of all, why is this movie set in 1994? It has no bearing whatsoever on the plot outside of the forced needle drops, and one of them, Oasis's Wonderwall, wouldn't have even been out in 1994. I'll give some credit to Millie Bobby Brown for trying to bring some weight to her teenage dystopian rebel who fights for the oppressed archetype, but there's only so much you can do with what feels like a character that was meant to be algorithmically relatable to as many people as possible. Her hatred of technology only seems to stem from her being a rebel in the first place, so she doesn't really have any personal stake in helping the robots, who are, of course, stand-ins for immigrants. The symbolism is painfully obvious, and I think the way the movie treats the audience intelligence about this is semi-insulting, as it just shouts its themes at you without really going more in-depth on them. And besides our two main robots, the rest are used as cliches, bits, or blatant product placement. I mean, Mr. Peanut as the leader of the robot resistance, are you kidding me? So who they're actually supposed to symbolize becomes a bit insulting to immigrants as a result, because most of them are just sort of generic. Chris Pratt is playing, and I hate to use this word again, but it fits with him, a generic action hero type. I know this guy can act when he wants to, but he is always choosing the easiest archetypes to play that can vaguely remind people of Star-Lord, and it's clear the Russo brothers had that in mind when writing him. Our two main robots are more charming than any of the human characters, but I can only really connect to them so much. Everyone here is an exposition dump device, and we don't really see how the characters feel about anything. They always tell us how we're feeling when it's necessary to the plot, and it becomes grating very quickly. I wish they would show us proof that they're feeling that way. Characters will also change motivation on a dime, which is once again done for plot convenience. And this is particularly the case for Giancarlo Esposito's character, who might be the worst part of this movie, sadly. I can't believe they relegated this great actor to mostly being behind a TV screen where we barely see his facial expressions. I can't blame him for not giving much effort and playing with his exact typecast, but it's in a far less interesting way. This movie is utterly hollow, and It's another one that we can add to Netflix's long, long roster of movies with unnecessarily large budgets that include famous actors who are really only there for the paycheck. Netflix intentionally creates movies that are meant to be distraction voids, where you can look at your phone and not have to pay attention, and this movie is a prime example of that. I mean, yeah, this is absolutely terrible and easily deserving of a very high spot on my list. At number 2 is Hurry Up Tomorrow, and another year where I have to put Jenna Ortega in my top 3 list on a worst list. I just don't understand what she's thinking or what her agent is thinking. From what I see in interviews, Jenna Ortega seems to be a pretty big movie connoisseur for someone of her young age. She also puts herself in this absolute dreck. I just don't understand it. Last year, she was in my worst movie of the year, Miller's Daughter, which is still generationally one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But this one is quite bad too. Now, this one had a sort of cool premise where it was actually going to be about The Weeknd, Abel's alternate ego that he sings in, Abel Tesfay's alternate ego that he sings in. But I should have also remembered that I shouldn't have had much anticipation for this because Abel Tesfaye is a horrible actor. I don't know if any of you have seen The Idol, but that was a show infamous for being quite bad, and Abel Tesfaye was easily one of the worst parts of the show. And yeah, he's not much better here. In fact, in some ways, he might be worse. I just don't understand how he can't play himself well. He's genuinely just playing The Weeknd, but I just don't buy him at all. He's not playing this character well. You don't really feel for his struggles, and whenever he's trying to convey genuine emotion, it just doesn't come across at all. The other actors on screen are easily acting circles around him. Both Jenna Ortega and Barry Keoghan are just much better than him, and even they aren't really given that much impressive to work with. Barry Keoghan actually might be the most interesting character here, playing this sleazy manager for Abel Tesfaye. Jenna Ortega is playing Anima, another type of sort of broken, rebellious character, which feels like an archetype that she just plays over and over and over and over again. I just don't understand why she doesn't expand her palette. This movie also feels very self-serving and pretentious, I'm sorry to say. I mean, it is about The Weeknd. The Weeknd made a movie about himself, so it is going to ultimately feel very self-serving in that way. And I just don't think it has much to say about him as an artist personality at all. There's scenes where they try to give visual symbolism, and Trey Edward Schultz is trying his best with what he's got here, but I mean, the visual symbolism just comes across as eye-roll worthy more than anything else. It sucks that Trey Edward Schultz is behind this movie because I love It Comes at Night, and I don't mind Waves either. But man, this is a huge step down for him. I just don't understand what happened here. Everything about this movie feels like an unmitigated disaster from beginning to end. I was flabbergasted by how bad it was. This is a just totally incompetent movie. It's not good as an artist profile. It's not good as a symbolic commentary on The Weeknd's struggles with drug addiction and anxiety on stage. Nothing about it works. And Jenna Ortega's character feels like an extra disaster on top of this already disastrous movie. Yeah, this is genuinely terrible. I am thinking that it was very much so deserving of all the critical painting it got because, yeah, there's really nothing worth praise to say here. Now let's talk about a couple of dishonorable mentions before I get into my number 1 pick. And I'll give a little bit of a brief overview as to why these are each dishonorable mentions before I talk about my number 1. So my first dishonorable mention is Keeper. This was made by Osgood Perkins, and after I really enjoyed Longlegs last year, Osgood Perkins had 2 movies that came out this year, and neither of them worked for me. Although I did like The Monkey a little bit better, it felt like a little bit of a cheap version of Final Destination. Keeper is, this movie is just so weird. It feels like more like a Gretel and Hansel type of situation, another Osgood Perkins movie. And if you know my feelings about that movie, You know, that's not a particularly favorable comparison for me. I didn't like Gretel and Hansel, and I don't like this one. It's trying to be a twisted fairy tale by its end, and it just doesn't feel like it was ever built up to be that way. I think it should have played more with its more grounded tone that it was going for in the beginning parts. But once it makes that shift, the movie just becomes very all over the place. Another dishonorable mention for me is, unfortunately, Captain America Brave New World. I did like Anthony Mackie in the role of the new Captain America. I like him as Sam Wilson as well. But the movie feels more like a soft launch for an Incredible Hulk sequel, with how it builds up Harrison Ford's character, who is admittedly one of the better parts of the movie, but I just didn't understand why they had to shoehorn in another type of hero buildup with the Hulk. It didn't work, and it made Captain America feel very much so like an afterthought in his own movie. The other villains here are generic as well. Giancarlo Esposito is playing once again with his typecast, and I just didn't find him particularly interesting. Also, Captain America has a sidekick who I don't even remember his name now. I just didn't care for him at all. This was a pretty forgettable Marvel movie. Dishonorable mention number 3 is another movie that Jenna Ortega was in, Death of a Unicorn. This one was just a little silly to me. Definitely a bit of a weird one to be under the A24 umbrella. But then again, A24 has expanded its palette recently of movies that are under its distribution label. But this one felt pretty generic horror. The idea of killer unicorns, I guess, was cool, but they didn't do enough with it. And Jenna Ortega is playing, once again, with typecast, the rebellious daughter who goes against her parents' wishes. Paul Rudd is really not doing much better here either. I didn't really care for any of the performances in this one. They were all fine, but nothing very legendary. And once again, includes some commentary about, rich people bad. Like, we haven't heard that before. It's just an amalgamation of a lot of cliches put into one movie that made me not really care for it that much. Dishonorable mention number 4 is Presence. This was another letdown for me. I did like another Steven Soderbergh movie much better, which I will be talking about in my best movies list. But this one, it had a cool premise, with the movie being from the perspective of a ghost watching a house, and us being in the perspective of the one doing the haunting. Could have been cool, but they don't do nearly enough with it. The ending of the movie is pretty impactful, and that's the reason it actually became a dishonorable mention, because the ending really does work in the movie, but a lot of the buildup is just pretty boring, and I didn't really care for the characters. They all felt sort of one note. And finally, our last dishonorable mention is Havoc. This is another Netflix original, and while there are some cool action sequences in this feels like a John Wick knockoff more than anything else, and Tom Hardy's character is not really doing much for me. Not much to say about this one, just sort of a boring action movie. And now at number 1, can you guess what it is? This is the one that I mentioned I watched simply because I was curious to see how bad it was. And yeah, it lived up to as bad as everyone said it was. Sometimes to delightful results. And what is that movie? Well, yeah, at number 1 is War of the Worlds, an Amazon Prime original. This movie is fascinatingly bad. I don't think it's as infuriatingly bad as Miller's Daughter was last year. That movie made me more genuinely angry just because of how gross it made me feel. This one was bad in sort of a fun way, but I still couldn't deny that it was the worst movie I saw this year for a variety of reasons. Now, I don't actually mind movies that take place entirely using other technology. For example, I like both Searching and Missing, which are movies that take place mainly on devices like computer screens or phones or things like that. But the difference is those movies use them in smart ways that make you feel interested, and they're constantly changing up how they use the technology to make you feel truly invested in the movies. War of the Worlds really doesn't differentiate itself that much. It stays mainly on a couple of different computer screens, and mainly it's about Ice Cube's character looking at different events happening as the aliens in the movie start to attack America. And it leads to a movie where you're just wondering, why didn't they just film it as if it was happening in real life rather than someone watching it on a computer screen? Well, one of the answers to this is that this movie was actually filmed during COVID times. It is also sort of perplexing that the movie ever got released at all based on what I saw. It feels like this movie was just sort of a huge mess from almost every aspect. None of the characters feel like they're really connecting to each other. You can tell they're in separate places because none of them really seem to have chemistry with one another. And all the reactions just feel like they weren't even seeing what was happening. It felt like the director just told Ice Cube, for an example, who's having to do most of the reacting in this movie. They just told him, oh, look shocked in this scene, or look concerned in this scene, or whatever. And yeah, if that's what happened, I don't blame Ice Cube for having some bad reactions, but also, he's just genuinely not good in this movie, I'm sorry to say. One of the worst performances of the year. There are some parts that are so funny, though, that it's hard for me to truly hate his performance just because of how silly and over the top it is. But it's just not just him that's bad in this movie. I think that Eva Longoria doesn't really do much for me and feels like she is delivering her lines like she's reading off of ChatGPT. Michael O'Neill and Clark Gregg are both very boring in this movie, and the actors that play Ice Cube's son and daughter, I mean, they're not doing much of anything either. The multiple turns that this movie has are very silly and just don't make a whole lot of sense, especially when he finds out his son is part of this hacker organization that he's been tracking. It is a twist that feels so weird and out of nowhere that it doesn't feel earned at all, and it ultimately adds up to what this movie is, which is a lot of plot conveniences. The way that Ice Cube is able to help stop this alien invasion is just because his family so happens to be equipped with the ability to do it. I mean, all of them genuinely have some sort of gift that they're able to contribute to this mission, and it just, yeah, it does feel just so utterly convenient. It is definitely very silly. But yeah, like I said, it is sort of enjoyable. And how bad it is, if you want to watch a movie where it's just very cartoonish and where you're going to have a fun time pointing out the bad of it, I mean, this will be the movie for you. This will do the trick. But I also can't deny it is a bad movie at the end of the day. And a lot of what it does is just genuinely terrible from front to back, but it is an enjoyable type of bad, and it is fun sometimes to talk about a number one movie where the bad is bad for an enjoyable reason, and that is the case with this one. So yeah, that ends this list of the top 10 worst movies of 2025. What were your least favorite movies of the year? Please let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave a like on this video, and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you on the next video.